Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Still feeling under the weather. It's just this cold that won't go away, and there's been some issues at home in terms of, like, our daughter ended up developing strep throat. My fiance woke up this morning and her throat was bothering her, and my throat's starting to really kind of start to bother me again. It was scratchy last week for a bit, but it kind of went away and it feels like it's coming back again. So I apologize if I'm clearing my throat. It's just trying to get my voice back. Or if I cough, because I'm still sick with the cold. This is actually my third time trying to make this video because I just end up falling into these coughing fits. And anyway, so I want to make this video short and sweet. You saw the title, so I just kind of want to get into it a little bit. So last week I ran my first combat encounter for the D&D Nova Scotia Autism group that I'm volunteering for. And a situation had come up where the player characters had to go into the sewers beneath Baldur's Gate, investigating a rash of, like, robberies and like break-and enters and stuff like that that have been going on. So when they get into the sewer, the players arrange themselves on the tiles, because I use the city tiles because they have a bunch of sewer stuff. And so I had them arrange themselves, and before the encounter started, I already had determined where I wanted the monsters to appear. So when they get into the sewer, through the sewage, jumping out of the sewage was going to be a pack of giant rats. And so I already had their starting places set up. So based on the party order, when I got to the rat's turn, the first one that I ended up doing for the attacks, because I usually do from sort of like left to right on the board. Probably because I'm left-handed, but anyway, so the first one that would have gone to make their attack roll was the rat attacking the wizard, and the wizard had an armor class of 10 and 7 hit points, I think, so not a lot of hit points. And the wizard, if I recall correctly, wasn't able to act that turn because it was a surprise round, which is something that I don't think I would do again with this group, just because the idea is sort of like team building. And when I kind of stopped and thought about it, it's like, well, team building, the first encounter when they had the first chance to work together, 2 of them weren't able to participate because I rolled so low on their perception. So anyway, but the wizard hadn't had a chance to go yet. And I rolled a natural 20 for the attack roll, and it's behind a screen. And I looked at the dice, and I had a split second that I had to make a decision in. And the decision that I made was that I was more concerned about the player having fun and about the group getting a chance to sort of work together to overcome an encounter. That meant more to me than trying to, than playing, let the dice fall where they may. Because with his 7 hit points, there is a strong possibility that rolling 2d4 plus 2, that I could have knocked him unconscious before he even got a chance to act, meaning that this player was now going to have to sit out the encounter. I mean, there was a cleric, but again, if things went a certain way, he may not have been able to, gotten to heal him, or, anything along those lines. So I decided that where he had 7 hit points, 2d4 plus 2, there was a strong possibility that he could have been knocked unconscious. 1d4 plus 2, there was no way I was going to knock him unconscious. So I changed that critical hit to a normal hit. So it went from being a natural 20 to just high enough to hit his armor class of 10. Because with a plus 4 bonus on the attack rolls, and against an armor class of 10, it's going to be difficult to miss. So I ended up having it just be a normal hit. And I've been thinking about that. And I kind of realized that I've done stuff like that, not a lot, but I do that more commonly than I think other dungeon masters might. So what I want to ask everyone watching is, do you ever fudge the dice rolls? And if you do you skew it in the player's favor, or do you tend to skew it in the dungeon master's favor? And I'm not going to judge based off of, your play style, But it's just something that I'm kind of curious about, and why are the reasons that you might do that? So for me, the reasons tend to be for the player's enjoyment, for the player, like to allow the player to have fun. There's one group that I ran back in third edition days, yeah, 3.5 I think it was. It was a three-person group, and one of the players, really through no fault of their own, was just constantly getting knocked unconscious. And they, again, it wasn't necessarily their fault. It wasn't, terrible tactics. It wasn't, rushing into fights without thinking about it. It was just, for whatever reason, my dice tended to roll much better against this one player. And, for the first few encounters, I was just letting the dice fall where they were. And you could see that he was becoming more and more frustrated, because just doing those normal rolls, he was being knocked unconscious most fights, and almost every fight he would sit out the last few rounds. And I started to feel bad, because again, this was a good guy. He wasn't a bad player. He wasn't someone that was trying to make everybody do what he wanted or anything like that. He was just it was just bad luck, and it was really, really bad luck. And so I had an encounter where the other two player characters actually ended up getting knocked unconscious, and he was the last one standing. So it was him and this one monster. I think it was an ogre, but it may have just been an orc, maybe an orc NPC barbarian. It was a long time ago. But I knew that both of them are down to their last hit points. I think the orc had like 3 hit points left, and I think the player had like 2, 3, or 4. So they were very close. Basically, the first person to hit was going to defeat the other one. And the orc went first, or the orc or ogre, whichever one it was. I'm just going to say orc because that kind of sticks in my mind a little bit more clearly now. So the orc went first, and he actually ended up rolling, and the attack roll was high enough to hit. So again, I knew that if I did that, then this player would get knocked out again, which he had done in every other combat that's happened so far in this session. It was the last, I believe it was even the last encounter of the gameplay session for that week. So I had the orc miss. I just said, sorry, I knew his armor class, I think, was 18, so I just said, does 16 hit? He said no. It's like, okay, well then it's your go. And he rolled, and he hit the orc. And his minimum damage was enough to knock it out. But I let him roll. He rolled well on the dice, and I remember he went away so happy. And he was super excited because he finally got to do something really cool, and he won the encounter for the group. And for me, that's that feeling that I got as the dungeon master, seeing the player who spent most of the combats, at least the better part of each of the combats, unconscious and unable to do anything. For me, it just felt really good to see someone who spent most of the time just kind of like that, suddenly come to life, be really excited, really happy. And the other players were really good about it too, so they were really happy for him. So that was the situation. I very rarely will fudge dice rolls in the other way, so I will turn, like for the players, to ensure that they're having a good time. If I feel like one player just kind of gets the brunt of the beatings, again, usually if it's through no fault of their own, if they get hit with a critical hit, I might turn it into a regular hit, or I may have it miss altogether. I kind of want, if I know that the player really, really enjoys their character, especially back in 3.5, where if you got knocked to negative 10 hit points, you died. So back then, if I knew somebody really, really loved their character, but the party didn't have the means to get them raised or resurrected, and if I did enough damage that it would have knocked them down to negative 10, I usually cut it in half and just said, okay, well, you're down to negative 5, and give them a few rounds to finish up the combat and stabilize the character. So those are sort of the reasons why I'll do it. On the other hand, there have been a small number of occasions where I've kind of gone the other way. And I'm not necessarily proud of them, and it's something that I do very, very rarely. It's not something that I would do on even a semi-regular basis. I think in the 18 or 19 years, I guess 19 years now, that I've been running D&D campaigns, I can count the number of times that I've fudged the dice in my favor on one hand. The most recent incident was one where, and I'm not going to get too specific, but I'm running a game where one of the players is constantly metagaming, constantly trying to tell the other players how to do their turns. Like, instead of just, even like suggesting something is fine, but it's like, no, you need to cast this spell on this creature, and then next round I'll do this, and that, and like just telling the other players how to basically, enact their combat. And the other thing is that the player is constantly trying to look over my DM screen. So there are times that, like, when I arrive, I'll set up my DM screen, and then I'll dump out my miniatures behind it, but I'll have them sort of along the very inside of the screen, so that they're, for the most part, hidden, and then once I start using them, I don't mind just leaving them off to the side of the table. But, this player would look over the screen and would look at the miniatures. And that was annoying. And I would just say, you don't need to be looking over the screen. But whenever I would make an attack roll, I would just kind of see, like that would be sort of the look of the player. And the way that the tables were set up, there was usually someone sitting next to me, and it just typically ended up having to be him. And it's like, you really got to stop looking at, my dice rolls. So finally I had an opportunity where it was just getting to be a bit too much, and this one player has a habit of kind of dodging out of encounters, and the campaign that's being run has a lot of random encounters that are 100% based on melee combat. So as someone who kind of avoids melee combat, very rarely does he ever take any damage, and it's one of those things where, again, he starts bragging that, oh, I'm at full health, I didn't take anything, when you've got the other melee characters that are, getting, beat on pretty bad. And I just sort of had enough, and I'd given plenty of warnings to, not tell the other players, like, let the other players decide how they're gonna take their turns. And it just kept happening. So I had a monster that had multiple attacks. And I don't know if this is necessarily fudging the rolls or not, but it's something where I changed my tactics, I guess, because I was getting kind of annoyed by the way that the player was conducting himself at the table. So the creature had multiple attacks, and I did roll randomly to see who he would attack, and I did that out in the open, and it happened to be this one guy. So the monster charged at him and slapped him with all of its attacks and grappled it and knocked it unconscious, knocked the player unconscious. And I think because that hadn't really happened to this player really up to that point, and the dice rolls again were legitimate. So anyway, but the player from that point forward seemed a lot less overbearing. And the creature that was attacking them did have the ability to swallow medium-sized creatures whole. So, and it would do automatic damage. So because those were the tactics, because that's what it had, I ended up there was another NPC that was with them that had healing abilities. So I had the monster at that point. I actually fudged things back in the player's favor at the end of the day, which is kind of interesting. But I had this NPC that had healing abilities also get swallowed, so that he could heal the player inside, and so that they could actually, try to cut their way out, so that the automatic damage wouldn't just cause automatically failed death saves. So it was, I guess, a situation where I still ended up fudging the dice, or fudging my tactics overall in the player's favor. So even that, I guess, isn't really a good example of me fudging the dice in my favor. I actually, come to think of it now, I don't think, because I started telling that story, I could have sworn that I had done something with the dice against that player, but I hadn't. It was a random dice roll, and I just changed my tactics. So yeah, I guess I pretty much all the time, if I ever do fudge dice roll, I will fudge it in the player's favor. So, my question to you guys, I asked it before, but I'll just reiterate at the end. When you're running your D&D games, as a dungeon master, do you strictly play by, whatever's rolled is rolled? And if you don't use a DM screen, it's a lot easier to do it that way. Because it's, it seems fair, it's random, whatever. Do you just play the dice straight, or will you modify attacks or damage rolls or anything for any reason whatsoever? And if you do, what would that reason be? Is it for the player's benefit? Is it for the DM's benefit? And let me know in the comments below, because I think it's sort of an interesting subject, and I don't think it's something that really gets talked about a whole lot. So, do you fudge the rolls? Why do you fudge them? And in whose favor do you tend to fudge them towards, if you do? And is it something that you do frequently, or is it very infrequently? So anyway, let me know in the comments below. I think I'd be interested to sort of hear what you guys have to say. So again, thank you guys very much for watching. Hopefully this wasn't too bad of a rambly video, because I haven't been sleeping well, have been sick and under the weather, so I'm trying to keep my thoughts as clear as possible. I'm probably going to end up laying down for a bit after this. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching again. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.